Alright, so here we have this Galaxy 12-inch oscillating fan. Now this is very similar to many Lasko, Sears, and Sanyo fans as they were made in part or whole by the same company. So that company was Sanyo. So the screws in this are JIS type screws and not Phillips. So use caution if you're using a Phillips screwdriver. The first step is to remove the grill. Now I use a flathead screwdriver in the manner shown here. You can do this any way you want, but, the goal is to not break the clips. Next is to remove the blades. It says on it which direction to turn it to tighten it and loosen it. Next is the back grill. Now this is usually a normal thread, so you turn it to the left to loosen it. And this can be tight because it's likely the first time it's ever been off of there. Next, remove the screws on the front of the motor and take the front cover off of the motor. Now clench every muscle in your body as you remove the handle that engages the oscillating mechanism, if there's no screw inside of it. After that, you can then remove the rear cover of the motor. After the cover's off of it, you can then take the motor and blow it with compressed air, use a brush on it or anything to clean it. As you can see, these three screws are identical. There's no need to keep them in any specific order. Next, remove the screw holding the oscillator arm onto the gearbox. This is usually a left-hand thread screw, except for the one I try to record. So just turn it slightly, and if it doesn't start to loosen, turn it the other way. Next, turn your attention toward the base of the fan. Now this is where it gets different from fan to fan. For many Sanyos, the base plate is metal. This would also vary based on the button configuration or anything like that. So this one has a very generic switch module, and a power cord that's just tied into place around that stud there. Now is the time to cut the cord. Before you do this, watch a little further in the video and see if your fan makes it even easier. Go ahead and ignore this if your buttons don't look like this. To wash your buttons better, you can rip them off of the switch module. So now we're at the wiring at the back of the motor. This is where it may be easier for some other fans. A lot of them had crimp connections or solder terminals here. For this particular fan, the wires run directly into the motor. This makes it easier than just to cut the wires in the base. So now take note of how the wires run into the base, and then go ahead and rip them out of there. Loosen the screw right here, then you can take the whole motor off of the base. The shaft there is greased, so it's not a bad idea to wipe it clean so you don't get grease all over your desk. Now I'm removing the capacitor from the frame of the motor. This was going to be an attempt to leave it wired and snake it through the frame, but that didn't work in this particular fan. Locate and remove the screws holding the two halves of the motor together. This is the first attempt to separate the two halves of the motor. Commonly, the capacitor will fit through the one half of the motor, but this isn't the case here, so you can go ahead and skip ahead. Here I am desoldering the capacitor. Now separate the two halves of the motor. The rotor will stay with the front half due to the pin used to index the blades. The pin on the shaft is pressed into place, so use a hammer to gently tap the pin out of the shaft. Pliers can then be used to pull the pin the rest of the way out of there. Pull the rubber cap off of the shaft. The rotor can now be removed completely from the motor. Take note of any spacers or washers that may be on the shaft. Now remove all the components in the gearbox. Take note of the orientation and placement of everything in there. There are two ball bearings in a spring to index the oscillating mechanism. These can fly across the room. At the bottom of the oscillator mechanism, there will be a washer. Don't forget about it in all of the grease like I did. For every other fan like this I've serviced, the foam to hold the oil near the bushings was exposed and could easily be replaced by felt. This is not the case for this one, so I just put more oil in it and hoped for the best. Here's me drowning the bushing area in oil and hoping for the best. So now I'm pre-oiling the bearing area on the shaft, and then putting the shaft back into the motor halves and screwing them together. From this point onward, you could realistically just watch the beginning of the video in reverse, but I'll record it anyway. So here I am reassembling the front of the shaft. Don't forget to put that rubber piece on there before gently hammering the pin back into place. Here I am reassembling the cleaned pieces of the gearbox. Lubrication is important for this, so put any grease in there to a similar amount as when you found it. Now go ahead and mount the capacitor and solder it back into place. Here I am stripping the wires that I cut before anything is installed in it because it's easiest to do it that way. I'm stripping them because I'm going to use wire nuts to join the two wires together. You can also optionally install the buttons back onto the switch module, but I do it later. The next step is to fish the wires through the base as they were originally. Before joining the motor to the base, be sure to lubricate the shaft with any grease, as it moves back and forth quite vigorously while oscillating. Once that's done, install the shaft back into the base and use the screw to hold it in place. Now reinstall the screw that holds the oscillating arm into the gearbox. Now is when I decided to put the buttons back on the switch assembly. Ooh, that was quick. Here I am joining the wires back together using wire nuts. Here you see me reinstalling the bottom plate with everything properly aligned. Now I'm reinstalling the twist tie that held the wire in place. Now's a good time to test it while keeping everything away from the electrical bits. Now is the perfect time to put the front cover of the motor back into place. Now do the same thing for the rear cover of the motor. Now don't forget the handle for the oscillating mechanism. Right here we introduce the rear grille. Just reverse the steps you took to remove it. Now go for those blades. Many of the front nameplates on these are different than this, but in this case one of the tabs to hold it in place was broken, so I used hot glue to hold it in place. If I didn't, it would almost certainly rattle. The final step is to install the front grille. First align the front grille using the pegs on the grille, then secure it into place using the plastic clips. Now that that's finished, your fan is now complete. But I do want to say your fan is probably not going to look exactly like this. They changed them so much over the years. Of course, while every plastic part is removed, it's a good idea to wash it. I rinsed my parts in a sink, but it would work just as well to rinse them in a bathtub or wipe them by hand.